The Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is sponsored by James Oliver Coffee Company at jamesolivercoffee.com. James Oliver is a second-generation family-owned and Detroit-based coffee roaster, offering 19 different blends of freshly roasted coffee. The company pioneered link temperature roasting, and they source the best beans from around the world to create an outstanding coffee experience, no matter which beans you choose. To start, try the Alma Mater blend. James Oliver Coffee gives $5 for each bag of its Alma Mater blend to the Detroit Public Schools Foundation. And don't forget, use the promo code CFSHOW, that's CFSHOW, to get 15% off your first order. James Oliver Coffee, available at select grocery stores in Metro Detroit and, of course, at jamesolivercoffee.com. Remember, use the promo code CFSHOW to get 15% off your first order. That's jamesolivercoffee.com. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit. Thank you so much for joining us as we record this interview in downtown Birmingham because our guest lives right near here. It is, of course, Michigan Supreme Court Justice Richard Bernstein, who is here with us today. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for coming up with this idea because it is nice to get outside.
I got to tell you, I am so happy to be here. I've been really looking forward to this. I really enjoy your program, and I love Deadline Detroit. So the pleasure is all mine. And how great does it feel, right? It's 80 degrees. We're sitting outside in Shane Park. Like, honestly, this is like one of those things that during Corona, I always try to find one positive thing in each day because the days are so challenging and difficult. So every day I try to say, what is the one positive thing that I can experience today that will make the day somewhat normal and somewhat enjoyable? And because of you, I now have my one positive thing that I can now kind of put this day in the book under.
Well, and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, though, because obviously anybody who knows your story knows that you lost your sight.
Right.
You have vision issues.
Yes.
And
you can just say blind.
You're blind.
I'm
That's
totally
fine.
cool with it.
No, I'm just saying. But
you know what I like? I like to keep it simple. It's like one of those things where people are like, "Oh, are you visually impaired?" I was like, "No, I'm just blind."
Well, but the issue, though, is that for most of us throughout this, if we've been either working from home or something like that, well,
Yes.
we've just converted to a new format, and that's Zoom to replace
Yes.
a lot of these in-person meetings.
Yes.
But Zoom isn't necessarily something that is any real benefit to you.
Right, that's
it's
correct.
not something that is actually blind-friendly, is it?
Correct. The challenge with the pandemic is that blind people get hit incredibly hard by a pandemic. And it's funny, we're going to make this as positive as we can, but we have to start with some kind of basic facts. Is that for blind people, Craig, people are our lifeblood. When I say to you that I love people, it is not a form of speech. It's not me just saying, "Oh, I really like people." I love people. People, for someone like myself, are a lifeline because the way that someone like myself interacts through the world, understands and appreciates the world, is exclusively and entirely through people. I can't experience the world on my own. Isolation is something that a blind person cannot do because we will not survive. So the entire way that somebody in my circumstance or situation deals with their blindness is to mitigate it by people. By being with people, by spending time with people, by asking people for help. And ultimately, the entire way that you learn how to be a successful blind person is to ultimately rely on the kindness and warmth of people. And so honestly, Craig, for me, before the pandemic, I always had a certain optimism and energy and enthusiasm and positive spirit because in my situation as a blind person, I always got to see the best side of people all the time. Every time I left my home until I came back, I would see only the good in people. People would want to help you. They'd want to assist you. They would hold on to you to help you cross the street. People were always looking for ways that they could provide assistance. People were always looking for ways that they could be helpful. So all my interactions for the entire day, I got to see the absolute most wonderful side of humanity. And I think during the pandemic, under social distancing, under the fact that we aren't able to congregate, under the fact that we don't go into our workplaces, under the fact that people are required to be separate, which is understandable for health reasons and safety reasons. That is completely understandable and appropriate. But the impact for someone like me, it robs me of all of the things that I love about life. Because for me, people are my lifeblood and people are my lifeline. And so when I have to spend the day without people, I, for all intents purposes, am without life.
And for many of us, again, there's that extended period of time where we're not seeing people, but we maybe can see them on the screen or something like that. I've been doing a lot of FaceTiming with my family and friends. Obviously the telephone's a huge lifeline for you as well.
Correct.
But does there seem to be almost something different about that aspect of it than there normally is?
Totally, because I want people to think about, imagine going through this pandemic if you're not able to use Zoom. Because Zoom is an inaccessible product. I can't use it. So imagine, I imagine, Craig, when you're doing your work, you're able to see people on the screen. So at least you have some kind of visualization of who it is that you're talking to. You're looking at a screen and you're able to see the face of the person that you're interviewing or that you're talking to. I would imagine that there would be some consolation in that ability to see people's faces, that ability to see their expressions, that ability to interact with them kind of through the screen, that I would imagine could make a huge difference. In my situation, I can't see people. So Zoom is of no benefit to me whatsoever, because if I'm on Zoom, first of all, I can't use Zoom without the assistance of someone to set it up.
It's
not accessible.
It's an interesting question, though, because this is not the first technology that you have been dealing with over the years in terms of accessibility issues.
Correct.
And I'm not suggesting that Zoom purposely did anything wrong here, but is there something that you think that they could do to make that product more accessible?
I think there's a litany of different things. I think that the real challenge...
Because they are becoming the de facto thing that everybody's using.
Yes, and I think the way that you have to look at it is you have to ask yourself, I want you to think, Craig, when you go home after this interview and you start using Zoom, I want you to think, how would I use this if I couldn't see? Meaning, how would you set it up? How would you know where to look? And how would you know kind of what to do if you didn't have someone that was able to set it up, kind of get it started for you, tell you where to look, tell you what's going on? If you didn't have like a third party that was able to kind of put it all together and allow for you to do it, I want you to think, how would I do this if I was all alone and I'm blind? So I think that there's a little bit deeper to it. It's not just the challenge that comes out of the technology, but there's actually a more spiritual and actually a more deeper kind of component to it, like a more deeper essence that just kind of comes out of all of this. And what that is that a person like myself who is blind is able to appreciate life through energy. Mm-hmm. You have a certain energy. Everyone has a certain energy. So the way that I connect with you isn't visually. So I don't, connect with you kind of through your visual appearance, but I do connect with you based off of the energy that you emit. All people have an energy source, and the energy exists within every spirit and every soul. When you're blind, you're not able to see what someone looks like physically. In many situations, physical appearance is a distraction. It allows for you to focus on someone's outside. But a blind person like myself isn't able to see what you look like. So if I'm not able to see you, then what ultimately happens is I don't know what you look like, so I'm not distracted at all by your physical appearance. However, the way that I do understand who you are and appreciate who you are is by the energy that you have. There's a certain energy that all people have. And as a blind person, I'm very sensitive to that energy. And I connect with you because I can actually tell a lot about your spirit and a lot about who you are by the energy that emanates from your spirit and from your soul that I can pick up on because I see you deeper.
Let's follow up on that
Sure.
then, because, one of the things that has happened, of course, as a result of COVID is that everything is being done virtually now.
Correct.
You guys at the Supreme Court are hearing cases on a virtual basis,
Correct.
and I'm not going to ask you about individual
No,
cases.
of course.
But do you get that same sort of energy from the attorneys who are arguing in front of the bench? And do you get that same? And how are you dealing with that change now?
It's incredibly difficult because what happens is it becomes more sterile. And for a sighted person, you're just not picking up on those cues the way that I do. I just pick up on every cue that you omit, in a subtle fashion. And so I need to be close to you. I need to be next to you. I need to be near you to be able to appreciate and understand the kind of essence of who you are. And I feed off of your energy. So if we're now doing everything from a virtual perspective, and we now have to be kind of in a more social distance mentality, then what happens is that I'm not able to have the connection with you because I can't feel, understand, and relate to the energy that you have, because I'm not going to get that over Zoom or through the computer, which I can't use anyways, but I'm not going to get that through the phone. I need to be in person, and I need to be connected to you in person in order for me to have that connection, in order for me to have that feeling, and in order for me to have that kind of genuine understanding of who you are. And I think that's the casualty of a pandemic, is not being able to do that.
Courts have been utilizing video technology in different ways for several years now, especially when it comes to things like arraignments. You know, you can do arraignments directly from a jail, right. Stuff like that. But this is different. I mean, you're actually getting whole arguments, legal arguments, and cross-examination going on over video right now in many instances.
Yes.
Do you think it's having an impact on the quality of the justice system at the moment?
So that's a really good question. I think there's a balance, right? I think in every situation, you know what you kind of love? This park has a lot of life.
Yes,
so
it does.
We're talking about life and energy.
Now.
So I have to say, I'm really enjoying this, because I got to tell you something, is that I need life. And I have to say, what's great about Shane Park, where we are right now, is it's got life. You know what I mean?
Wow,
and I got to tell you, Craig.
Sounds like John Lennon meets Gordon Lightfoot over there.
But the thing is, though, I think we got the children, we got people. I have to say, this is what life is about, having life. And I think we need this life and this energy. And it's interesting how, when you're around other people, or when you're in an environment like this where it's crowded and active, how that engages your spirit, and it actually lifts you up, because you can actually feel the life that exists around us. And I think there's a big part of that. Now, going back to your question about the courts.
Yeah.
So there's a balance to everything, right?
You got planes going over too.
Yeah, I love that. I know it must be difficult for like the sound and all that kind of stuff.
It's just fine. Don't worry about it.
But I got to tell you something.
Podcasting is awesome.
But I have to tell you something. We're in the world. I mean, this is, at the end of the day, this is the world. Like, things have been shut down for so long that you start to forget what the world is. And what's great is that now, for this moment, we're in the world, and we're engaged in the world. And I have to say, it's wonderful. But I think, in answer to your kind of more serious question about kind of the issue of kind of using, the technology in the court and things of that sort, everything in life has a balance. And I think it comes down to kind of understanding and appreciating what that balance is. So I think in the situation that you're dealing with, the fact that you're doing things online, there's a tremendous benefit that exists out of it, because it makes the courts more accessible, right? It's easier on lawyers, it's easier on judges, it's easier on plaintiffs, it's easier on defendants. So there's a balance that comes out of it, which basically allows for the system to actually operate in a more accessible fashion, in a more accessible format for a lot of people. But then I think there's another balance, which is that nothing is as good when you're not in person. And I think, Craig, at the end of the day, like we were talking about at the beginning of this, my hope is, when we look at this pandemic, that we stop using the term like the new normal. Because I think when you say the new normal, that robs us of hope, that robs us of optimism, that robs us of idealism. I can't handle this as the new normal. The way I like to approach this or see this is that for a certain period of time, we're taking a pause. There's a pause that we're now taking, and that the pause is existing kind of throughout our lives, throughout our interactions, throughout our families, throughout our friendships, throughout our work life, but that we're taking a pause, and that the focus is on pause.
Well,
I am hoping that people will get past this.
But what we are seeing,
and we'll have reunification.
We are seeing a number of companies, though, that are suggesting that this type of work schedule might be something they go to, maybe a hybrid, and schools are doing it as well.
I think it's horrible.
Well,
I think that's horrible.
But if
absolutely horrible.
If indeed this is going to happen,
yes,
what do they need to consider when they're considering how it's going to impact some of their employees who have different abilities?
So let's bifurcate.
Okay.
I don't have any issue if you're talking about safety, right? If we're talking about safety, this conversation does not apply, right? So we're talking about our pause, right? So for the time being, we pause and we do what we need to do to get through this. Whatever we've got to do to survive this in as safe a manner as possible, we as society have to do. But that's the pause, right? Your question goes to more of a long-term perspective in terms of how do we function on a long-term basis. So my argument back to you would be that once the pause is lifted, that once it's determined that society can resume, that once it's determined that we have therapeutics, that we have a vaccine, or that we can get to a level that allows for us to live and work and do it in a safe manner, the pause has to lift. And what that means is that we have to be able to go back. My hope and prayer is that we don't come out of this and say, let's start functioning the way that we functioned under the pandemic. Let's start having people stay at home. Let's start having people not go to school. My hope is that once it's deemed to be safe, that we get back together, that people get back together, that people go back into their offices, that people go back to school, that people meet in person, that people start traveling, that people start going to lectures, that people go to speeches, that we have big gatherings, that we do things in person, and that we don't do things virtually. Because honestly, as a blind person, I respect safety and I respect the pause, but the goal has to be that the world must reunify, people must be brought together, and life must resume in a way where we can be together, where we can do things together, and where we can interact, and we don't live in an isolated society by choice.
I mean, you have spent a lot of your career in fighting to make sure that people are included as technology comes online. I think about some of the work you did on the Wayne State Board of Governors when they were moving to Kindles for students, and you said, hey, Kindles are not accessible for blind people. They're not. Amazon made some changes to that thing as a result of that.
Yes, they did.
And so they actually have, you can get read to by your Kindle these days, which was a big deal. And other universities followed suit.
Yes.
The company followed suit.
Yes.
Now, in this pandemic, in this rush you obviously got to do things, but if we ever get to a situation like this again, how do you ensure that people do have, again, accessibility is addressed when we're talking about the long-term ramifications of this kind of stuff?
I think you just have to recognize, let me just tell you a story, and I think this will kind of give you like a certain kind of perspective to this in terms of how tough this was, right? So I want to take you back to March and April, okay? So we're going to go back to March and April when everything got shut down. Now, I want you to imagine being blind and you live independently, right? And, the challenge that we had was, there was corona in my building. So for obvious reasons, it was, I didn't want people to come near me, right? Because I didn't want to put anyone at risk. So you had to live kind of very much on your own and figure out how to do this on your own, right? And nothing was set up for someone like myself because I wasn't going to bother people or ask people for assistance or for help, especially since my apartment building, I was fine. I have no issues, no problems. I got tested. I was negative, no problems. But the thing is, my building had corona in it. So you didn't want people to be put at risk. You couldn't ask people for help or assistance because you didn't want to do anything that was going to put someone at risk. Do you follow what I'm saying? So the issue was, for like a month, I was completely isolated. And the challenge was when you're talking about technology and you're talking about these types of provisions, people didn't really think about, if you shut everything down, what is that going to do to certain people, right? Who don't have access to things. And so it was interesting because I didn't have access to technology the same way that everyone else did. And for me, getting food became very difficult because the grocery stores took about 3 weeks to deliver. So that wasn't an option because you needed food. And then what happened was when they closed down all like the restaurants, they were requiring people to use the apps. But the apps were not accessible, so I couldn't get food by using apps because
Grubhub and things like that.
It doesn't going to work. I couldn't do it. So do you know what I did for an entire month? I went here to Beyond Juice, which was amazing, and they were and I'll always be grateful to them for this. And I said to them, here's my problem. I can't use your app And I can't use all the other places were requiring app usage in order to kind of get foods. And I said, I can't use the app. Can you help me? Will you allow me to please come in and buy my food in person and make a payment in person without having to use the app? And they discussed it and they worked on it, and it was like a whole big process in order for them to do that. And then thanks to their kindness and generosity, they said, look, we're going to work with you on this, and we're going to allow for you to come in person in order to get your food. And do you know, Craig, for an entire month, I ate the same thing.
A lot of smoothies.
I can tell you exactly what I ate. I had a Birmingham salad, which was actually quite delicious. I have to tell you, it was actually very good.
But every day
I had I get two of them because I was hungry. I would get 2 Birmingham salads and 2 strawberry banana smoothies. And I ate that for an entire month. An entire month. And I will tell you one really funny story. So one of my friends who's a school teacher, she's really a wonderful, wonderful person. She was teaching classes online, and she said, would you be willing to come and lecture to my class? And I said, well, you know what? I would be happy to come and lecture to your class on one provision. I would love Chinese food. So if you want me to lecture to your class, you need to bring me Chinese food. And
I think that's legal compensation. I think that's ethical.
And I said, because I really would love to. I just haven't had Chinese food, and I would really love Chinese food. So I'm happy to lecture, but that's my one rule, is I want the Chinese food. And then the best was, we did the lecture, and I had the Chinese food, and you have to understand, I had been eating a Birmingham salad for like 3 weeks, and it was so delicious. I have never enjoyed egg rolls and the chicken and the soup. It was just absolutely delicious.
Like
and I will
first
tell
meal
you,
out of prison.
Exactly, but I'll tell you, no, because prison probably had more variety
That's true.
than. But here's the thing, Craig. I kind of reached a low point at that moment because I actually said to her, I said, you know what, Karen? I said, I have finally come to a point where I will now work for food. I said, this is where I've reached my life, that I will now literally work for food.
I should remind folks, my guest right now, of course, is Richard Bernstein. He's a member of the Michigan Supreme Court.
And for anyone out there, I'll work for food. Like, seriously, I'll do a lecture or presentation. If you bring me Chinese food, totally there.
Well, I do want to take just a couple of minutes before we wrap up, because we've been going for quite a while already.
I hope we don't wrap up, because I got to tell you, the great thing about being in person, you enjoy it so much that you don't want it to end.
Well,
so when you're
there
with
you
someone
go.
in person, you don't want to end, because and listen, we've got music and kids and a fountain, and it's really nice.
We also have a whole lot going on in this country right
Yes.
now. And, of course, we just lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Yes.
just, of course, on Rosh Hashanah. And the country is not at ease right now about this. And you are a member of the Michigan Supreme Court, which is different than the United States Supreme
Correct.
Court, obviously. But I think there's a lot of people that are concerned that somehow the judiciary is going to fundamentally change with this thing. And I mean, I want you to tell me, from a judge's perspective,
Yes.
somebody who's on the highest court in the state of Michigan, how confident are you that the justices, both at your level and at the federal level, are doing this based on their actual reading of the law
That's a
over
great
politics?
question.
Because there's a lot of concern that just because you're appointed by somebody, you got to follow their way, or just because one party nominates you here in Michigan, you have to follow that. How do you maintain that independence despite all the pressure coming down on you to do things a certain way?
I have to say, that is an absolutely fabulous question. And I will say this, I think the judiciary is the one branch of government, if you were to, and there's many polls that back this up, the judiciary is really the one branch of government that people genuinely respect. They genuinely respect it. Like, I recognize that both in state government and federal government, that the legislative branches and the executive branches have their struggles and have their challenges. But if you look at all the data and all the polls, it really is the judicial branch that still has tremendous respect. People see the judicial branch as a genuine branch of government that does the best that it can and does it with integrity and does it with honesty. And I want people to feel confident in their judiciary, whether it's the federal courts or whether it's the state courts, that what you tend to find in the judiciary is it really is the last branch where genuine camaraderie and collegiality exists. So if you were to come to the Michigan Supreme Court on a Wednesday when we have conference, I think you're going to find something to be remarkable. You will find some of my absolute closest friends are actually my fellow justices. They are my closest friends. These are people that I just have tremendous fondness for, tremendous love for. And these are people that I spend time with, not just in court and not just at work, but socially. And I think what you will find is that judges really have cordial relationships. And when we are engaged in some incredibly intensive conversations, people respect each other. People listen to each other, people admire one another, but most importantly, when we have discussions at the Supreme Court level, if you make a solid and heartfelt argument and you use the law and you use statutory interpretation and constitutional construction in order to put forth your argument, people are open and are willing to listen. So I will have to say is that I have a lot of confidence that the judiciary is the branch that can rise above all of this, where people really do the best they can to follow the law, to interpret the statutes, to understand the legislative history. And I think what happens is that in many situations, when people come before a judge, whether it's a federal judge or whether it's a state judge, the one thing I think most people will say is they will say, you know, I disagree with Justice Bernstein's decision, but I can see how he got there, and he was fair in how he got to it. And I think that is the way that judges really approach this, because judges see themselves differently than politicians. Judges see themselves as people that have an allegiance to the institution, that have an allegiance to the Constitution, whether it's state or federal. And I think the institution that judges are sworn to protect, for all interpretations and all essence, really usurps and really overrides any and all politics that intervene or are part of it. So you might disagree with how a judge reaches their decision, but I really do believe that when judges interpret things, they really do follow the law. They really do follow the Constitution. And again, people might disagree with some of the findings and some of the rulings, but I will tell you, as a justice who works with justices and judges and attorneys, that at the end of the day, the law has to make sense for people to respect it and for people to value it. And I really do believe that the vast majority, if not all judges, are sworn to protect that and live up to their obligations.
Well, on that note, we will wrap this up,
my friend. Are you sure? Because I'm really enjoying this.
I know.
You want to talk about any other things? We can talk about...
I'll tell you what, I'll have you back pretty soon.
Can we? Because we got the perfect setup right now.
Well,
we're in the park, and just so folks know, it's like 80 degrees, so it makes
We've only got a few more days like this left, I'm afraid.
But that's why we got to maximize it. And like I say, our goal is, when the pause is over, we all have to focus on reunification and coming back together, because at the end of our days, we come to realize people need each other. People have to be with each other. People want to be with each other, and people are created to be with each other, and we can't be apart.
All right. Well, we'll leave it right there. Richard Bernstein, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
You.
Appreciate it very much.
My name's M.L. Elric. I'm an investigative reporter and a connoisseur of fine yogurts. I know a little bit about Detroit. I know a little bit about deadlines, and I'm asking you to become a member of DeadlineDetroit.com. Like me, I'm not asking you to do anything I wouldn't do. I'm making a monthly donation. My wife is making a monthly donation. I know that seems redundant, but they need the money, and the money goes to a good place. Getting the story out, getting the truth out. Because if we don't support local journalism, there's some people a couple blocks away from here who are going to get away with a whole bunch of stuff that's going to cost you a whole lot more than just a few bucks out of your pocket every month. Go to DeadlineDetroit.com, become a member. You'll see it's really easy at the top of the website. Give early, give often, give generously. Just give a damn. That's the best way I know how.
The Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is sponsored by James Oliver Coffee Company at jamesolivercoffee.com. James Oliver is a second-generation family-owned and Detroit-based coffee roaster, offering 19 different blends of freshly roasted coffee. The company pioneered link temperature roasting, and they source the best beans from around the world to create an outstanding coffee experience, no matter which beans you choose. To start, try the Alma Mater blend. James Oliver Coffee gives $5 for each bag of its Alma Mater blend to the Detroit Public Schools Foundation. And don't forget, use the promo code CFSHOW, that's CFSHOW, to get 15% off your first order. James Oliver Coffee, available at select grocery stores in Metro Detroit and, of course, at jamesolivercoffee.com. Remember, use the promo code CFSHOW to get 15% off your first order. That's jamesolivercoffee.com.